Thank you again for joining us, everyone. Of course, we hope everyone is keeping safe and healthy during this time. This webinar is part of our COVID-19 series. We've covered the impacts of COVID-19 on people's mood and what this means for brands at a time like this. We've also looked into new health routines, the impacts on personal hygiene, new eating habits, and what's really been changing in home care routines. And last week, we looked at the shift in alcohol consumption. That was an interesting one for sure. So each week, we try to dive into different sectors. So please do send us a message in the question function with your email address if you have a topic of interest. We're all ears and we're all open. But why don't we kick off with some introductions? So some of you might have heard me before, but my name is Zara. I'm a client partner and strategist at Streetbees. And really my focus is on supporting our new and existing clients to really utilize the Streetbees solutions and methodologies that bring you real growth from real consumer data. I've also got Ross here. Ross, if you want to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Sarah. So I'm Ross McKnight. I work at Streetbees as a deployment strategist. So my focus of my role is really in supporting in the delivery of Streetbees solutions, making sure we embed them within clients' businesses and ensure that our insights can get turned into actions. So there's a couple of housekeeping pieces before we get into the data that I'm just going to run through. So first off, as Zara mentioned, you should be able to see a questions function. So please feel free to ask any questions at any time, and they will get looked at and sent through to Zara and I. We obviously, depending on the volume of questions, we might not be able to get through all of them during the session. But if we don't, what we'll do is we'll certainly make a note of them and we will get back to you on anything that we don't answer today. If there is a problem with any technology, please just bear with us. Obviously, we're all still sort of learning how to manage all of these digital discussions at the moment on a big scale as well. So we know they can be unpredictable, but hopefully nothing goes wrong. We're recording the session today, so please let us know if you would like to have a copy of that recording to share around with your colleagues, for instance. And I think the final point on housekeeping is just that today we'll be navigating through our COVID-19 hit dashboard in order to share data from it with you. So you can probably see it on your screen at the moment. I'll be going through a number of tabs to share as we share data points. So please, we recommend you try and look at that on full screen or even Zoom in order to be able to get the best quality possible as you're watching and looking at the data points. Okay, thank you. So with all of that done and the intros done, we're going to start. So today we're going to start from a macro point, and then we're going to zoom in, and the focus of today's session as we go further into it will be on media and entertainment. But during the series of webinars, we always start by looking at the overall mood, the emotions and fears across the different countries that we are looking into to help us understand how this may impact people's behaviour. So even though the situation feels on the surface like it's starting to settle, like we know people are becoming more accustomed to the restrictions that they're under, the lockdown situations, but we can still see a lot of anxiety across the globe. Anxiety levels are high in countries such as the US, the UK, Italy, and Spain. We can see that, so people feeling anxious and stressed, that's the predominant emotion within those countries at the moment. In other countries, though, there are other feelings. So in countries such as Germany at the moment, the overall feeling is a bit more positive. I think a lot of that's down to the way that they've tackled the situation. There's been a huge amount of testing in Germany, and they're also in the stages of easing lockdown measures as well. So there's more positive sentiment there. Though it is worth noting that actually that since some of the measures have been eased, contamination rates have gone back up slightly. So obviously this is something that can move very quickly in the data, and so it's again something definitely worth keeping an eye on as the weeks go on again. If we look over at India is also actually now feeling more positive, which is something we've not seen for a number of weeks. What we've seen over the last probably 3 to 4 weeks is that the predominant feeling in India is of paranoia and people feeling scared. A lot of that is actually an outward feeling, and we'll see that when we get onto the fear, when we look into the fear index as well in a minute. And then China, where obviously where the virus has been with them for longer than it has anywhere else, of course, its feelings in China are more positive as well, and more positive than they are anywhere else. And obviously this is because they've been through what was felt to be the worst of the virus, and they're now reporting to have managed to control the rate of new cases, and isolation measures are continuing to be eased as life sort of tries to go back to normal or the new normal. So we're going to look at our fear index now. The fear index is a simple calculation. We ask people about their fear levels on a scale, and then we calculate the index based off the percentage who are afraid minus the percentage who are not afraid. So we're going to start by looking at a country comparison. So you should be able to see on the screen now the 10 main countries that we are looking at, and so that we're looking at in our study. And you can see the differing fear levels across the globe at the moment. So where you have very high fear levels in countries like Japan and across most of Europe and India. But in contrast, you can see in a country like South Korea, very low fear levels. Now, South Korea, we know, they've used extensive amounts of technology to try and monitor and prevent for the outbreak of the disease as much as possible, and restrictions there on people's movement have been fairly limited as well. So fear levels have stayed relatively low in South Korea. We can also compare the trends that we're seeing. So if we move on to this chart, this is the same chart, but just looking at the latest week of data up to the 25th of April versus the week before. And this is so really interesting seeing how fear develops from country to country. So obviously at the start of the outbreak a couple of months ago, and when lockdown restrictions started to come in, we saw fear levels really rise quickly. And then we started to see some fear levels actually decline in some countries. But what we've seen in the last week is that even though there is some positive sentiment from people, there's actually more fear as well. There's more fear and this is particularly across some of the European markets. So if we think about Germany, where fear levels have generally been quite low, there was a huge jump in fear levels last week, in Spain and in Italy. Now, one of the things that all of these countries have in common is that in the last week, they were all subject to either some restrictions starting to be lifted, or announcements of restrictions being lifted. And what's happening is people are actually reacting to that and those announcements of restrictions being lifted with an increase in their fear and their anxiety, because they're uncertain about what that means. I think a lot of people are actually scared that these restrictions might be lifted too early, and they don't feel confident that they know that things are going to be okay. And so even though what feels like a positive step, what should be a positive step, it's being met by consumer sentiment in a different way, and they're actually feeling more fear, which obviously has a big impact and means a lot for brands and the messages to people, and certainly shows that just as countries come out of lockdown, it's not going to be a case of people going back to normal very quickly, because actually there's even more fear starting to come into those countries. So there's a lot of different feelings and fear levels across different markets, and we can also see that when we start to look at people's reactions to media. And Zara is going to start to talk about that in some more detail now.
Thanks, Ross. So yeah, we're going to look a little bit more into the media proportion of this, and a really good place to start here is looking at how consumers perceive the media coverage around the outbreak. We see different markets have very different responses to that. Even markets with similar fear levels or mood levels have a different perception on how media's role as a result of this, as a result of COVID-19. So if we look at the 12th of April to the 25th of April, just to see that evolution, and I think Ross is kind of hovering over that little bit now, we can see how consumers believe the media portrayed this crisis. And actually in China, we see very few people believed the crisis was over-exaggerated by the media. Actually, we see over 60% are in disagreement with this statement. In other markets, like India and Germany, the majority of people believe that the media exaggerated the crisis. And then we can see a different evolution. So in India, the number of people thinking the media exaggerates the crisis grows over that 2-week period, while in Germany, we're seeing it decrease, and the number of people feeling neutral about this question increases. That air of indifference as people start to try and shift that mindset from being in a very COVID state to returning to what that normal could be like. Now, if we're thinking about Italy, we know Italy has been one of the European countries most affected, and also quite early on. With this market, you see that opinion has also changed from having around 38% agreeing that the media has exaggerated the crisis to 20% later in the week, correlating with the reality that they're coming to experience and realizing that things are getting better as well. And we see that other European countries and similar fear levels have also similar feelings about the portrayal of media within this crisis, thinking about countries like France, and if we look at Spain as well, and finally the UK, they track similarly in that respect. Of course, as situations are very different from market to market, we know the media coverage wasn't the same, and that these markets had very different approaches. So it's quite interesting seeing how they're being received and how we can learn from that. What can we take from that China understanding, but also that German understanding, for example, and their reactions to that. We're going to look now at impacts and mood on behavior. One question we pose, for example, is how does this impact the trust consumers have for the media, or how much consumers are actually turning to the media at all? If we look at it, consumers are using global news outlets and local news to keep informed. That's something we can expect and something we're seeing in our data, but the level of trust is significantly low. Only 13% are actually trusting these global news sites despite them using it. We see people are very cautious with media sources. They don't fully trust governmental information or even the World Health Organization. And that's around the variety of media that's been coming to them. So we can look also country to country. You see within this, if we're looking at Japan, Japan trusts the news more, as much as the WHO or the government information they're seeing. So consumers are having a certain skepticism and a more critical approach to the information they receive, as this is hitting home to them, and it can be really emotionally draining. It's now trickier than ever, we're aware, for brands to share a message while taking into consideration that consumers are being bombarded by a lot of information. So how to protect themselves and their loved ones, the measures that are being taken by the government and they have to take for themselves. All brands communicating at the moment have to take this into consideration. So how is this going to filter down into brand interaction, we might ask? certain brands like your larger pharmaceutical companies can focus on the work that they're doing with the frontline staff, etc. And service providers are trying to showcase how level and quality of service will remain high. But the real question that we're getting is, how are consumers actually interacting with media at this time? And what are the brands who touch this category as well? I'm going to pass on to Ross to talk you through that.
Thank you, Zara. So we're going to start by looking at what people are actually doing with their time now that they're at home, because we think it's important for all brands to have a real idea of what people are doing to help them refine their communication and the channels for them to communicate in. And a key part of that is understanding what the way that people are actually behaving. So we can look at our activity index, which is very similar in calculation to the fear index. We know what we've asked people about what they're doing more of, and look at the percentage that are doing more of something minus the percentage that are doing less of something. So it's obviously of no surprise that people are cooking more at home, and that is the single thing that we're seeing people doing more of. And then other things that people are doing more of are also activities that are happening in the home. So people watching more TVs and movies, more online and social media, but also doing things like exercising more at home, which again could in many forms mean that they are consuming some form of media there, because there's an awful lot of online video and on apps that people are using to try and help them with their exercise. Obviously, the body coach's daily workouts have been a huge success throughout lockdown so far. And we've also seen a rise in people using one-to-one fitness sessions as well, and using Instagram as well to follow live videos of fitness sessions. Certainly sort of former professional athletes are trying to do that as well, and using Instagram a lot when they're doing fitness videos online. And finally, we're also seeing gaming have a huge boost. So activity-wise, people are consuming a lot more media than they were before lockdown. But let's also take a look at what people are purchasing. And it tells a bit of a different story when we look at an overall category level. So again, this is our category purchase index, and it's important to mention here, this isn't calculated on volume. Again, it's a comparison between categories, and again, we're asking people about what they're purchasing more of or less of now versus before the sort of the coronavirus outbreak. And entertainment, you can see here, is something that people are saying they're purchasing less of at a total category level. So that's really interesting, because people are obviously, they're consuming more entertainment and media, but they're not actually purchasing more. So there's a couple of things that can be going on there. Obviously, people are spending more money on things that are essential, and they're spending less money on things that are discretionary, and entertainment falls into that category. So people are reevaluating whether they need to make those purchases. Also, entertainment's a category where people already have a lot of things that they can use, or things that they've already purchased, so they don't necessarily need to purchase more at the moment, because they might already have those subscriptions. Now, this is a total category level, and obviously what we can actually do as well is start to scratch beneath the surface of this and understand that at a subcategory level there is a bit of a difference in the way that people are purchasing as well, and that's something that Zara is going to start to pick up on now.
Yeah, let's hone in on the entertainment dashboard so that we can do that. Right. So What we're seeing here is we have a breakdown that's really specific to the entertainment category. Looking at this category's purchase index, off the bat, we can see that video streaming services are winning in this category, as on-demand TV subscriptions and movie streaming and TV programs streaming are being purchased more. On the other hand, print is being hit pretty hard as consumers are buying less books and less magazines, less newspapers. We've seen quotes from consumers stopping their subscriptions as a way to reduce their monthly spend. So print advertising in glossy magazines is going to continue to be seeing a hit there, and for it being less powerful from now on. For gaming, we see less purchases of consoles, again, probably due to the cost associated with them, and the costs associated with games, and a similar thing for mobile games. But that's not to say that these are not happening, because we've seen people talking about big ticket purchase items, etc. But actually, in the grand scheme of things, it's on that purchasing less index. When it comes to music, those services are less popular than their video counterparts. Possibly due to the free alternatives like YouTube and SoundCloud, etc. We're also looking at the app and services that are now getting more popular during the crisis. For communication, WhatsApp, owned of course by Facebook, is the favorite most used app, which isn't unsurprising. But we've seen that shift in Zoom, that video conference tool coming in second. It's being Skype, it's being Google Hangouts. Prior to the crisis, it was very much something that was used within the remits of the business context and the business video calls. But now we're seeing it get more and more democratized and coming up in ways that are quite interesting as well, be it catching up with friends, having a birthday party via Zoom, etc. It's interesting to see our consumers getting more and more accustomed with these tools as well. We're seeing that spread throughout different age groups. But so why don't we kind of look at more of these apps that consumers are using? Without much surprise, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, platforms with loads of opportunities for brands to share content are there. These are the apps that they're using. We can see one main e-commerce app in Amazon. If we filter those for 18 to 24s, you start to see a huge generational gap when it comes to this app usage. So we're seeing TikTok and Instagram being those new trendy platforms, and Facebook really being seen as left for the older generation, really firming up its position there as something that's suited for the older generation. And we actually, when we filter for the 18 to 24 range, if you're thinking TikTok could actually be higher on that list, and why is it not higher? I think it's worth noting that the app's large amount of that audience is under 18, and we don't include under 18 within this COVID dashboard. So you will be noticing that as well.
Thank you, Zara. So we're now going to have a look at some of our in the moment behavior before we get to the end of the webinar. And this is where we've captured our bees sharing moments with us about what they're doing at the moment when they're doing it. So live data that we get from them. So we can still see that our consumers are they're actually watching an awful lot of news. So despite where the data we looked at earlier, when they're asked about their trust levels in media, there's a lot of skepticism there, and people don't have much trust for the media. They're still consuming huge amounts of it, and so the news is the thing. We're seeing more people watching the news than watching any other program. And if we take a quick scroll through the photos, you can see that we're covering that's covering national news across over 30 different countries here. We can also see that Netflix is benefiting from the lockdown, so it's giving people the time to jump onto their latest releases. We can see here things like the Tiger King, which has obviously been a huge phenomenon recently, is on that list of top programs that people are watching when they're showing us what they're doing in the moment. But we can also see, I think it's also interesting to point out that we can see people watching things that they might have watched already. They're not just consuming new content. You can see things like Friends and Grey's Anatomy right near the top of the list. So programs that are available both on streaming services but also on regular TV as well. And they're some of the things that people are going to too. So they're not just spending all their time looking for new content. So we've also asked our consumers as well about what they're doing differently to what they're doing before, because they could have just been doing all of these things before and watching Tiger Kings and watching Friends and Grey's Anatomy before lockdown. But 4 out of 10 of the people that we're talking to are actually consuming media and entertainment in a different way than they would have been pre-lockdown. And unsurprisingly, the key change in that behavior is that they are consuming more of it. So and watching more movies and series is the single thing that people are doing more of in terms of all of the entertainment and media that they could be consuming. It is movies and series that's been the major change of the sort of the COVID period, and especially the lockdown period so far, where people are consuming a lot more than they were beforehand. But they're also playing more games, more board games, watching more news, even though they don't trust it, and they're reading more, using more social media. And of course, one of the big drivers of that is the fact that they're staying home and not going out. Then we have also asked people about what they've been doing differently, but also what they'd like to see changed as well. And this, again, it gets sort of even more interesting in the fact that people are watching an awful lot more content. They're buying more subscription services, but the thing that people want more than anything else, if they desire something to change about their entertainment that they have available during lockdown, it is that they want even more. So people have got loads of stuff, they're buying more new streaming services, but they would like even more variety of TV programs and movies to consume during this period. And a lot of that is the fact that they are bored, and they need more things to keep them occupied and keep them entertained. So you can see, for instance, in some of the verbatims that we have here, there are examples where people are talking about the fact that they're watching programs so that they can take their minds off coronavirus, or so that they can protect stop themselves from feeling bored as well. And it's really, entertainment is a real source that people are leaning on throughout the lockdown period in order to get them through it and give them moments of happiness in this time. So I'm going to hand back over to Zara now.
I think what's going on here is really interesting. You see that third piece there, more indoor activities. They are really turning and looking to brands right now to be smart about the sorts of things that they're putting in front of them and giving them more ways to entertain themselves, because they appreciate I can dive into more TV and more content, but I'm looking for free content. I'm looking for a wider variety, and I'm looking for more things that I can do in the home that I enjoy. So how can brands communicate with their consumers, and where should your limited budget be going at this point in time towards creating new in-home experiences? We know festivals and sporting events, the majority of these are looking to be cancelled this year and postponed to the next. So how are brands repurposing their budgets that were maybe locked up for sponsoring? Consumers are also turning to social media a lot. As we said, you can use this platform to share information and answer concerns, adapt your messaging so it's not insensitive. But actually, from what we've shared, the key is to expect that skepticism, and that answers are going to continue to be different moving forwards. Is there influencers that we can tap into who we know are more aligned with the content that they're seeing? They're seeing that through the TikTok experiences and through Instagram stories that sometimes relate to COVID. From the verbatim we're seeing, it gives a lighter lens on that piece as well. So we need to find new ways to leverage the tools that people are now using to communicate. With a lot of frustration, for example, not being able to go out and then being more anxious, brands need to find new ways to be close to their consumers. How can consumers leverage those tools to create new experiences? What pieces are using WhatsApp and using Zoom? Are there Zoom workshops or ways you can use Zoom that are virtual and consultative or allow events to occur? And of course, don't forget about PR through the news. Consumers are still watching the news, they're still staying informed, and they're noticing brands like J&J, for example, who have been pushing towards that piece of really putting themselves out there and being on the front line. So there's a piece of being informed and engaging with those brands. So it's key to be really careful with your messaging there and to ensure you're not kind of spreading that panic.
Thank you, Zara. So I am conscious of the time. I don't know, Zara, whether you've seen if we've got any questions that have come through at the moment. I don't think I haven't seen any at the moment.
We have had some.
We will just. Okay.
But we don't have time at the moment to go through these.
So, okay.
So what we'll do is definitely be in contact with you via email, give you kind of some of those answers and come back to you then, because we realize we're running over already. Lots of content there to get through.
Yeah, so we're sorry if we've not answered your question today, but as Zara said, we will get back to you via email to try and answer all of your questions. Also, if there's any specific categories that you would like us to talk about in the future, please let us know. Please get in touch either still through the chat icon in the webinar, or send an email separately. And again, we'll follow up to anything that we receive. So thank you everyone for your time today, for joining us and letting us show you our dashboard and diving into media and entertainment. Please stay safe, stay healthy, and stay home. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.